Catrin is a poem written from the perspective of a parent. It talks about the constant attempt at separation, but throughout it proves that there will always be a connection between them. It charts the relationship from birth to adolescence and comments on key themes such as love and hate, pulling apart but failing to do so, unconditional love that a parent would have for a child, and their relationship in more detail. It's structured in an interesting way. If you look at the way the poem's laid out, there's one long stanza about the past and the birth, and then a second stanza about the present, which is smaller. And you might want to think about what that could represent, maybe a visual symbol of a mother and her child. There is quite a lot of information on GCSE Bite Size if you go to the English Literature section on this poem that you might want to have a look at. A lot of the language in this poem uses juxtaposition and oxymorons to show how the parent-child relationship can be full of love but also arguments. And we see very clearly the memories of the parent from birth to being a teenager. At the beginning of the poem, the pronouns are mainly I and you, but this changes by the end to are and we, suggesting that the relationship between the parent and child is changing constantly. Catrin is not mentioned by name except for the title, perhaps wanting the poem to be more universal and open to everyone. The poet stands in a hot white room at the window, watching people and cars taking turn at the traffic lights. This hospital room that she is in sounds quite sterile, contrasting with the intimacy of the moment of birth. It's clear that the day means a lot to her. She remembers the minor details, whereas for everyone else it's a normal day. And it's interesting that she's chosen to comment on the traffic lights, perhaps wanting the connotations of the colours in the lights to represent their relationship, stopping, starting, that kind of thing. When she talks about our first fierce confrontation, it could maybe be referring to the brutality and the pain of childbirth. The red rope of love is a metaphor for the umbilical cord, maybe linking in to a tug of war, which is a fight or a competition. We could look at the connotations of red and think about the symbolism of passion or blood. This square environmental blank, disinfected of paintings or toys that she describes, perhaps suggests that before she had the child, her life was missing something. There was a void, there was a blank. When she writes all over the walls with her words, this could represent maybe screaming and shouting as she colours the clean squares with her colourful language. The wild tender circles are an oxymoron, perhaps suggesting conflicting feelings, and the circles themselves may be the contractions that she's experiencing. We see the pronoun are coming through now, maybe suggesting that this is now about both of them. And we have enjambment to draw attention to the word separate, something that they're both wanting to become. It seems to be a constant battle for independence. Neither won nor lost the struggle, so they're separate, but they're still joined by something powerful and important. The glass tank perhaps suggests an incubator, maybe the beginning of her daughter's life was quite tense and stressful. Maybe this changed them both. Describing her daughter with her straight, strong, long brown hair suggests that she is now older, and her rosy, defiant glare suggests that she's constantly challenging her as a mother, bringing up from the heart's pool that old rope, tightening about my life. And we can think about the significance of using that metaphor, the old rope, again. What does this represent now? Is it the fact that they're joined together? And tightening may have positive or negative connotations, so you can think about what that word suggests as well. Love and conflict is another oxymoron that's used, again linking into the fact that this relationship, although loving at times, can also be full of conflict. And the final 2 lines of the poem refers to that conflict. the fact that her daughter wants to grow up and become independent. And throughout, although talking about conflict, the poet uses a fond and relaxed tone. Despite her daughter constantly wanting to pull away, she seems to realise that this is a natural thing, that a child is going to want to have their independence. You could practice answering this exam question. How does the poet describe the relationship between a mother and her child in Catrin? Which is quite an open-ended question. If you use spirit to answer the question, remember to start with the ideas in the poem, what the key themes are, and then maybe go on to the tone and voice. What feelings does the persona have about the relationship, and how do you know this? If you're picking out key imagery that tell you about the relationship, you could talk about the red rope, and perhaps have a look at some of the key words, tightening, or particular techniques that are being used, and perhaps finally thinking about the structure of the poem. Another question you could attempt to answer is, how does the poet use opposites and contrasts to illustrate the process of growing up? A bit more complicated, but if you use spirit, again, you could practice focusing your answer on this question and thinking about the mark scheme, what you would need to do to get the C or above. Thinking about comparing this poem, it's a little more difficult to find lots of poems to compare it to. You could maybe choose Belfast Confetti, which is about conflict that affects an individual and again is a personal response. But perhaps the most obvious poem is Cousin Kate, which is also about a woman having a child.